before I start with some like recommendation or some suggestions, I want to first explain what an AI agent is. So basically, when we're talking about AI agents, we're talking about LLMs, large language models, like the ChatGPT kind of like AI. So we're talking about LLM agents more specifically. The idea behind AI agents is that usually you have something like, ChatGPT. So you have an LLM like ChatGPT, and you give it some input. So basically some prompt, like, I don't know, what is the capital of Iceland? So you have some input, and then you get some output in the form of a text. The capital of Iceland is blah, blah, blah. And that's like how we basically use these kind of like LLMs like ChatGPT or DeepSeek or Gemini or Anthropic, Claude and stuff. So that's kind of like the interface usage. And then we have like the API usage. So OpenApp or Anthropic or Google with Gemini or other like providers, they have an API as well, which lets programmers use these large language models. An API is an application programming interface, which means we get a programming interface. We get something like ask GPT, what is blah, blah, blah. So we get some kind of like a Python commands or JavaScript commands or PHP commands or whatever. We say, I don't know, maybe you import something, you npm install something. So you have some kind of like a code, and then you access the language model through an API, not through some kind of like a user interface. You write some code, that code gets directed, like makes a request to some API server, and then you get back some output, which is usually not in the form of like plain text or raw text, but you get some kind of like JSON. So answer capital Iceland is. And then you can use, of course, this JSON in your code, so you're inside the programming language. At this point, if you want to integrate this functionality into a website, you already know how to do this. You use like fetch request, or maybe you npm install a specific package that allows you to write your JavaScript, send some kind of like a prompt to the API, to one of these APIs, and get back an answer and parse the JSON and display it on the page. And usually we find like a specific npm package. So if you're like looking to use, Gemini by Google, and you want to use some kind of like an LLM, like a version of Gemini on your website, you look for, I don't know, maybe npm Google Gemini. Usually there's an official package. Let's see if there's an API. So we have like this Google namespace on npm, and under this at Google, we have certain tools. And there is a Google Generative AI JavaScript software development kit that helps TypeScript and JavaScript developers build applications powered by Gemini. So if you want to integrate Gemini, you npm install, and then as you see, you follow the steps. There's a quick start guide in most of these npm packages, and here's like the minimum code that's required to make a request and ask some question to a particular Gemini model. In most of these models, you will need some kind of like an API key. So you go through the process of opening up an account and getting an API key. It's just some sort of like a special password, if you will. And usually they give you this like free plan where you can make some requests. There's some sort of limitation, like 1,000 requests per day or 5 requests per minute or whatever. And then you have to pay to get even more access. So that's kind of like the basic usage for a programmer through the API. Now, what is an AI agent? If we go one step further, so that's, I think, like a pretty cool idea. What you do with an AI agent, instead of using this very simplistic, let's say, approach of just prompting the LLM, ask a question and get back an answer, you have like this LLM, you still have some sort of an LLM, like a Gemini or OpenAI or Claude or whatever. And instead of just giving them an input and an output, you let them have access to a bunch of tools. And these tools can be anything from like, maybe API calls, so they can make API calls to some service. They can maybe I don't know, book a ticket. They can access the weather. They can search the web. So there are specific tools. You can think of them as APIs. Basically, most of the times, all these are API calls to a service that can book a ticket, that can book a flight, that can maybe access the weather or search the web and gives back some results. And what you do is, instead of your LLM relying on its, let's say, on its memory or on its kind of like low knowledge to give you back an answer, it can use specific tools. For example, if I ask an LLM that was trained in with some past data, like from 2025, if I ask like who's right now the president of Hungary, the LLM will not know. So instead, I can say ask LLM who is the president, or I don't know, the prime minister of Hungary now. Like, now the LLM cannot like answer this question correctly because they were trained on data from 2025 and now it's like April 2026. So what they do is they are programmed in a way, so you give them some kind of like input, but instead of just searching through their knowledge and giving back like some kind of like an answer, which in this case it would be a hallucination, meaning they will give you like a fake answer because they don't have this knowledge. They will guess, or I don't know, maybe give you some kind of like a wrong answer. So instead, they're programmed to use a tool. They say, okay, they kind of like are aware, or they know that this information should be up to date. If you ask what is X now, they know that they have to go out on the web and search for this question. So the LLM now can work with certain tools, the tools that you provide. And in this case, they go and they search the web, they get an answer, maybe they get something. So they would get some kind of like an answer from an API, which means all this information will come back as kind of like a JSON. So you can see these are like kind of like up-to-date results, like 3 days ago. And there will be some kind of like a JSON that says like, let's say, result, and it will contain like more information. Like usually the results from search engines is not like Peter Mayer. There will be an article, there will be some kind of like a post or something like that. But the LLM uses the tools, it gets back the answer, which contains something like, like this article, like from the Independent or NPR or CBC. And what they do is they take the answer, they give it back to the LLM as like a new prompt, is as if you asked the LLM, given this response, provide an answer. So now they combine your question with the search results, and then they give you an answer. And then the AI agents can become like really, really complex or at least advanced. You can also ask for information from more than one sources. You can maybe have like a Wikipedia tool, which sometimes it's up to date. So maybe somebody updated Wikipedia with the latest results from the Hungarian elections, and you get some extra information also from Wikipedia. And then this question plus the Wikipedia results plus the result from the web, they now get back to the LLM as a new prompt. So programmatically, some new prompt is created in a way that looks like, given this context, like given this information, the Wikipedia answer and the web results, can you answer the question, who is the Prime Minister of Hungary? And then they give you an answer. So in a sense, an AI agent is an LLM which has some tools available to it. Instead of just immediately giving an answer, they can pick a specific tool based on what they're asked to do. They also have some memory, which means that if you get an answer from a question, they can store like this information here. So Prime Minister of Hungary. So when they give you the answer, apart from giving you the answer, they also store this in kind of like, in a short-term or long-term memory. So next time you ask the AI agent, who's the Prime Minister of Hungary now, instead of going to the search the web or the Wikipedia, they might search their memory and they will give you an answer. They will say, I checked this like 1 hour ago or 2 days ago. This is the answer. So an AI agent is basically an LLM with superpowers. Instead of just giving an input and getting an output based on the internal knowledge, they have some memory that they can update from the real world. They have tools available to them that they can ask for help. In AI agent terminology, this is kind of like a way that the LLM can access their environment, like the real world, so they can learn more things about the world by using some tools. And also, apart from having like an LLM, which can be thought of like a black box that you give it an input and give it an output, instead of just using a single call to an LLM, they have some really smart strategies where they can chain these LLM calls together. So basically, what this would look like would be you have like a question: what is the president of blah, blah, blah? So you give a question to an LLM at this point. The LLM uses some tools. It gives back an answer. Maybe it's Wikipedia, maybe it's search results, maybe it's even more. Maybe it's the short or long-term memory. So they get the answer and then they go back to another LLM call. So now answer plus question, so plus the original question, what is the president of Hungary? They now go to another LLM call and they give you a more informed answer. So now you get your final response. Like a series of calls to an LLM, not just one call. You utilize these LLM calls in a smart way. That can be like 2 LLM calls or even more. Sometimes like you can have another, like a 3rd or 4th or 5th or even more LLM calls. You're using the tools, you're using some memory that you look up in case you know something from the past, and then they give you the final response. And then if this is something, let's say, a little bit more complicated than asking the president, you can even have another LLM call, and you can say, you can use an LLM. There's this term like LLM-as-a-judge. So instead of just giving the final response, you can say, you can ask another question to a third call to the LLM. So given this question, so given the original question and this context, the data that you picked from Wikipedia and the web, and this response. So instead of just giving the final response to the user, you say, double check the response and evaluate. So even before giving this final response to the user, you give all this information to another LLM call, which is going to evaluate the response, and it's going to see whether the response looks correct, or maybe it's in a way or in a form or in a format that it's appropriate. For example, let's say you asked, what is the president of Hungary? Give me back the result in XML. And in here, like the final response looks like this, like not like an XML, but as a JSON. Maybe this LLM was like small model, maybe this was like a not very good model, and it made a mistake and it gave back the correct answer, but in not the correct format. It just didn't follow the instructions here, and instead of an XML, it gave you a JSON, or vice versa. Now, this third LLM will say, no, this is not kind of like the correct format, and it sends back the final response, which is in the form of XML. So answer something like this. So you have another call that takes the previous data, compiled data, like the original question, the instructions, the data, the second response, and it compiles and gives you a much more appropriate response. So an AI agent basically is a smart way to use LLMs as you can see, kind of like functions, like nodes, like tools that you can combine with other tools, with memory and other like cool tricks. And instead of just a black box that you put one input and you get an output with limited knowledge and with no kind of like way to interact with the real world, you create this very smart kind of like framework, and they can do so much more than like a simple API call to like ChatGPT. Now, you can set up this structure, this architecture yourself, but usually we use a framework. And one of the most popular frameworks that's available in JavaScript, it's called LangChain. And there's a lang graph. And you use them like it's an npm packets, and you use them like to create AI agents and integrate them into your website. You npm install LangChain. So LangChain, you search for TypeScript. You can also use it with plain JavaScript. So LangChain.js, there's also a Python version. And there's a bunch of like documentation and websites and videos. Like there's a ton of resources out there. You can also check our YouTube channel for some introduction. And then you have to follow the getting started maybe guide, and there should be this agent quick start. So you npm install LangChain, and then this is a very simple example of how you can create an agent in LangChain that is able to use one tool. So you can define your own tools. In this case, it's like a dummy weather tool that gives you back the weather for a given city. But usually there's a ton of ready-made tools that you can combine with this agent. There's a weather tool, a web search tool, a Wikipedia tool, a calendar tool. You can just put almost anything you can imagine. So you import some things, you add the tool, you create an agent, you pick like the model. So you can pick OpenAI, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, or Anthropic Claude, and then you provide the tools. What tools will this agent have available? In this case, the only thing that this agent can do is learn about the weather. And then you run some command and you ask a question. What's the weather in Tokyo? It's a dummy. It's not a real weather tool. It doesn't make an API call to actually get the weather to a particular city, but you can find lots and lots of tools that can do it. And then this will provide some kind of an answer that says something like the weather right now in Tokyo is blah, blah, blah. I think LangChain is really a great tool that you can use to integrate, to create agents like pretty easily and integrate them into your website or web applications. And then you can search for other like libraries or SDKs or tools that you can help you like create, define agents and integrate them. All these big companies provide some kind of like a library that can help you build agents. There are also other like frameworks. So Llama Index, Crew AI, these are good, Vercel AI. So look for a framework by the provider themselves. So that's about AI agents, what they are, and how you can try out some of these frameworks.